To lock down or not to lock down, that is the question. Welcome to Arm Wrestling with COVID-19 in London. This is number 17. To be honest with you, I wasn't planning to record another short reflection on YouTube today. But what happened is that earlier in the morning, I had an exchange with a friend of mine in Lebanon, in Beirut. He is a friend and a colleague that I've known for a very long time. We worked together many, many moons ago on Palestinian issues and refugees in Lebanon. And he's a political consultant, but he's also involved with the Middle East Council of Churches. And I told him that the churches in the United Kingdom, particularly the Catholic and Anglican churches, are agonizing these days on whether the churches should stay closed, should stay shut, and what degree of lockdown should apply to the churches, or whether they should gradually open up. And that led me to think a little bit more on the matter of lockdown, particularly since this coming Sunday evening, our own Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will be addressing the nation with what is hoped to be some sort of coherent, concrete, substantive plan as to what is the strategy, what is the roadmap forward, how are we going to deal with the next phase now that we have said, and I suppose it is true if the scientists and medics are saying, that we have flattened the curve, we've reached the peak, and now the peak is coming down. So what kind of lockdown and what kind of openness for the United Kingdom? And of course, when I talk about lockdown, it's not as simple as black or white. There is so much gray, different shades of gray in between, that it's very difficult to decide how to approach it. Now, some people might say, you know what, we're over the peak, let's get on with it, let's boost the economy, otherwise the recession will be even worse than what it is meant to be, and let us start working. I mean, you look around, there are more people walking, there are more cars on the roads, but you see the shops, and most of them are still closed in the UK, and I suspect in many parts of the world as well. But Europe is beginning to tiptoe its way out of this complete closure. So what would the UK do? Well, there are a few considerations I think that we should keep in mind, hence my 2 pence worth of thoughts with you today. The first one is to compare this global pandemic with the Spanish flu of 1918. For those of you who remember, and there aren't that many people who are still living from that era, the 1918 Spanish flu came in 3 waves. The first wave was a strong wave, but it was the second wave that was the killer. That was the wave that sort of shot up the number of deaths into millions. And then there was a third wave, which was much, much softer, much less harsh, and then we went out of that pandemic too. So the question that is being asked, and that I ask myself, is if we're past the first wave, a hasty openness, would it actually contribute to a second wave, which would be much, much harsher, much stronger, much deadlier? Or would we get, as some analyst was saying on the radio a few hours ago, would it be more in like wavelets coming and being with us? Because at the end of the day, let us be frank about it, this pandemic, this coronavirus, this COVID-19 is not going to disappear fully until and unless we get the vaccine, and until and unless the vaccine is effective, and until and unless the whole world is allowed or able to take the vaccine. So we're not talking about days, we're not talking about weeks, we're talking about long months. I mean, the idea, if I start thinking about that, depresses me even more, but that is a fact. And as the French would say, c'est la vie. So the question is, how do you manage this in terms of health, in terms of managing to keep the UK as much as possible safe from a second deadlier wave, particularly that we took our merry time to get into the lockdown. At the beginning, we did so many wrong things that we suffered the consequences in the number of deaths in the UK, which incidentally is now only second to the United States. So that's one thing. But then some people would turn and say, Harry, you're talking about health, health, health. Fine. But we always have to live with a certain degree of risk in our lives. We can't immunize ourselves. We can't firewall ourselves from all risk. And that's absolutely true. But they continue, if that is true, then we have to relaunch the economy. And we can't sort of keep everything shut down, because at the end of the day, the bill would be so hefty, so high, that we won't manage it. And to go around and saying that the bank, the central bank, will print more and more oodles of banknotes, and we will go into another wave of quantitative easing is not really the answer, is it? So basically, that is where we are. It comes back to the same thing I said many, many YouTube episodes ago, that it's a difference, or it's a kind of a, how should I put it? How do you reconcile health on the one hand and lives on the other? Or to put it a little bit more graphically, lives versus livelihoods. And also, if we are going to look at this, we also have to realize that what happens in England as one of the 4 nations of the UK is not necessarily what happens in Wales, is certainly not necessarily what happens in Scotland. We've heard First Minister Nicola Sturgeon talk, and she is really a good politician. She knows what she's talking about, no nonsense, straight facts. And it's not the same as Ireland either, because with Ireland, we have Northern Ireland, but there is a republic. And whether we like it or not, and no matter how much we prattle on about Northern Ireland being part of the UK, there's an equally organic link between the Republic and Northern Ireland. So there also, the realities are different. So there should be a certain devolution in terms of responsibilities and decisions taken by the political leaders of all 4 nations. And it is political leaders, because that is where the buck stops. It's not the medical advisors and the scientific advisors. It's not people who learn about science and medicine who are going to tell us what to do. They might advise us when they are not busy doing silly things, as we know from the stories that we've heard in our newspapers recently. But the politicians, and primarily the Prime Minister with his political advisors, the SAGE Group, the COBRA, all these people are the people who have to decide what happens next. And it's a very difficult decision, because whichever way they go is fraught with risk. But go they must, because to continue living in this, I don't know what to call it, a cocoon, a vacuum, is not sustainable in the long run, and many more people are going to start getting upset about it. So what I would say is, let's be strong. Let's hope that on Sunday evening, we'll hear from the Prime Minister something that is sensible, that is coherent, and that is not bluster and stonewalling and sort of clever sentences, but rather transparent, fair sharing with the people of this country about what lies ahead for us. I think it is time to hear the Prime Minister on that. And so I leave it with you. And whether the churches, coming back to my essential conversation with my colleague and friend in Lebanon, whether the churches will open, whether the Anglican Church will now follow the example of the Catholic Church in terms of virtual or digital services, or whether we will end up having a small number of attendance in the churches, I don't know. But I think the churches are not independent of the larger reality of this world, just as incidentally, we're talking about churches, but the mosques in many of the Middle East, North Africa countries are having exactly the same conversations, the same dilemmas, the same quandaries. Particularly, remember, for Islam, it is the holy month of Ramadan, And it is even more urgent for them. I mean, we've done Easter, we're past Easter, we're going into Ascension, Pentecost, and into ordinary times. But for Muslims, this is the most important month with fasting and prayer and almsgiving. And in a sense, they're facing the same challenges that we are. So good luck to us all. And also perhaps I could end on a thought for VE 75th anniversary Victory of Europe that we are celebrating this weekend. And VE Day is when Nazi Germany in World War II surrendered. And Her Majesty the Queen will be addressing the nation as well. And it is, to me, a high moment in our lives. But let me also end with a challenge. I know that my sister Holly listens to my YouTubes, and I'm grateful to her because she's also busy with her husband and her children trying to keep a lockdown. She's also got an aunt and uncle, but she still makes time to listen to me. So my challenge to you, Holly, is the following. I'm about to go out for a meeting, so I've got my shirt and tie on. Do you remember this tie? And what do you remember about it? Take care, everybody. Stay safe, keep well, and all the best.